The square was alive with cruel anticipation, a sea of murmurs rising like buzzing hornets. The elders sat upon their raised wooden chairs, eyes stern and unyielding. In the center stood Alina, the merchant's daughter, her silken dress clinging awkwardly to her rounded frame. Her cheeks, flushed with both shame and anger, glistened with tears she could no longer restrain. For years, she had been known for her arrogance, mocking those who worked the land, ridiculing children for their patched clothes, and demanding that even elders bow before her wealth. But pride has a way of breaking, and today hers had shattered. The council spoke coldly, their words like iron shackles. For her insolence, Alina shall be given to Elias the farmer. Let her learn humility through hardship. Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by laughter. Women whispered, men shook their heads. Some jeered openly, the fat one will finally know hunger. One villager shouted, and the crowd erupted. Alina felt the sting of every word like a lash across her skin. Her gaze darted to the man she was being handed to. Elias stood still, weathered by sun and labor, his face unreadable. He neither looked at her with pity nor triumph. He only bowed his head once, accepting the decree in silence. To Alina, it felt like a death sentence. The cart wheels creaked over stones as it rattled away from the village, carrying Alina and her new fate. She sat rigid, her face turned away from Elias, refusing even to glance at him. Every bump in the road jostled her, and she clutched her skirts tightly as though that small act of defiance could keep her dignity intact. The fields stretched endlessly around them, parched earth, broken fences, a few weary animals grazing lazily. At last, they stopped before a small, crooked hut. Its roof sagged to one side, patched with straw and wood that seemed ready to collapse at the next storm. A single window hung crookedly, its glass cracked. Alina stared in horror. This could not be her new home. Compared to her father's estate of polished floors, silken drapes, and marble fountains, this place looked like a cage for beggars. Inside, the hut was no better. A rough wooden table, a single chair, and a bed stuffed with straw. Dust clung to the corners, and the air smelled of earth and sweat. Alina wrinkled her nose, pulling her shawl tighter. Elias set down a jug of water and poured it into a chipped clay cup. Wordlessly, he offered it to her. She turned her face away, pride forcing her lips shut. Yet when he left it on the table and walked outside, thirst gnawed at her until she snatched it up. The water was warm, tasted of clay, and nearly made her gag. Her stomach turned. This was her new life, reduced from luxury to dirt. She believed she had been truly abandoned to misery, blind to what the vast fields around her really meant. Night fell quickly, draping the little hut in silence. A single oil lamp flickered on the table, throwing long shadows across the rough walls. Alina sat stiffly on the edge of the straw bed, staring at the uneven floorboards as if they might swallow her whole. The bedding scratched against her skin, each strand of straw poking like needles. She shifted constantly, unable to find comfort. Elias sat at the table, eating quietly from a wooden bowl of thin soup and hard bread. He didn't invite her to join, nor did he press her when she refused earlier. The smell made her stomach twist. Simple, coarse food, so different from the rich roasted meats and honeyed pastries she was used to. Hunger clawed at her belly, but pride held her tongue still. Hours dragged by. The lamp burned low. Elias stretched out on the floor with only a blanket, leaving the bed entirely to her. His silence was heavier than any words could have been. At midnight, her stomach growled so loudly it startled her. She turned her face away in shame, certain he had heard. Without a word, Elias slid the half-full bowl across the table toward her. For a moment, she hesitated, her pride screaming against it. Then, trembling, she took it. She ate in the dark, each spoonful tasting bitter with humiliation yet warm with relief. Elias said nothing. He only closed his eyes, as though her small surrender had been enough for the night. And in that quiet, Alina realized, this man was not cruel. His silence carried something far more dangerous, patience. The next morning, sunlight pierced through the cracked window, pulling Alina from a restless sleep. Her body ached from the rough bedding, and her eyes were heavy with exhaustion. She groaned as Elias stepped inside, carrying a wicker basket. He placed it near her without a word. "Pick," he said simply, his voice deep and steady, then turned toward the door. Confusion flickered across her face. "Pick what?" She followed him reluctantly, clutching her skirts as the morning air stung her skin. The fields stretched out before them, rows of vegetables, tangled with weeds. Elias bent down, showing her once, plucking a ripe carrot from the soil and placing it in the basket. Then he left her to it. At first, she scoffed. Her soft hands were not made for dirt. But the sun climbed higher, and hunger gnawed at her again. Hesitantly, she knelt. The earth was hard, the plants stubborn, and soon her palms burned with scratches. Sweat beaded on her forehead, soaking through her dress. Every bend of her back felt like torture, every pull from the soil like a battle. Villagers passing by smirked openly, whispering, pointing, delighting in her humiliation. By sunset, her dress was stained, her knees caked with mud, and her hands blistered. She wanted to cry, to collapse, to curse them all. But when Elias handed her a bowl of stew that night, made from the very vegetables she had gathered, she tasted something new. Not luxury, not pride, survival, and it was strangely satisfying. Days blurred into one another. Each dawn, Elias placed tools in her hands, a bucket, a hoe, or a basket, and walked into the fields without waiting to see if she followed. At first, Alina resisted. She lingered in the hut, sulking, refusing to move. But hunger was merciless, and when no food appeared unless she worked, she had little choice. Her body fought her at every step. The weight of the water buckets bent her shoulders, the sun burned her cheeks until they blistered, and her back ached as if it might break. She cursed under her breath, but Elias never answered. He worked beside her in silence, sweat running down his brow, his hands moving with steady precision. His silence stung worse than any scolding. One afternoon, she stumbled while carrying water, the bucket slipping and splashing into the mud. Her dress was soaked, her face burning with shame. Villagers watching from the road snickered. She braced herself, expecting Elias's laughter or scorn. Instead, he walked over quietly, lifted the bucket, and set it upright. His large, calloused hand steadied hers. "Hold steady," was all he said. The words were simple, but they pierced deeper than cruelty. He hadn't mocked her. He hadn't pitied her. He had treated her as though she was capable, even when she didn't believe it herself. That night, lying on the straw bed, Alina realized she no longer hated him. She hated herself, for beginning to respect him. One golden evening, after another long day in the fields, Alina wandered further than she ever had before. Her legs carried her past the hut, past the patchy garden she had been tending, and up a low rise that overlooked the land. She wanted only a breath of air away from blistered hands and aching muscles. But when she reached the top, her breath caught in her throat. Before her stretched an ocean of wheat, the stalks glowing like molten gold in the fading sunlight. Farther still, she saw orchards heavy with fruit, neat rows of grapevines climbing trellises, and cattle grazing lazily on rolling hills. The land stretched farther than her eyes could see, vast, organized, prosperous. Her knees weakened. This was no pauper's patch of earth. This was wealth greater than her father's caravans, greater than the merchant estates she had once flaunted. Behind her, a shadow fell across the grass. Elias had followed silently, his steps sure and unhurried. He stood beside her, his eyes scanning the fields as though they were nothing remarkable. "Yours to see now," he said simply, his voice low, steady. Alina turned to him in disbelief. All this, his. She remembered the cracked hut, the patched clothes, the silent endurance of villagers, mockery. He had never corrected them, never defended himself. He had hidden his empire beneath humility. And she, blinded by pride, had mistaken it for poverty. That night, Alina lay awake, staring at the crooked ceiling of the hut. The image of endless fields and orchards burned behind her eyes. She replayed every moment since she arrived, the laughter of villagers who believed she was being given to a beggar, her own scorn for the cracked cup, her prideful refusal to touch the soil. And all along, Elias had let her believe it. Why endure mockery when he could silence them with a single word? Why choose a leaking roof when he could have a grand house? The questions clawed at her, yet the answer seemed to whisper in the steady way he carried himself. He did not need to flaunt wealth. He did not need to prove anything. He lived by quiet strength, by labor, by patience. Her heart twisted with shame. She thought of her father, who draped himself in jewels, who demanded respect through gold. Elias, without speaking, commanded more than her father ever had. At dawn, when Elias handed her a small loaf of bread, she did not avert her eyes or turn away. Instead, she held it with both hands, her voice soft, almost breaking. "Thank you." It was only 2 words, but it was the first time she had meant them. Elias looked at her for a moment, then gave the faintest smile, so small she might have imagined it. Yet it warmed her more than silk ever had. The weeks turned into months, and with each passing day, Alina felt herself changing. The spoiled, pampered girl who once scoffed at labor was fading, replaced by someone she hardly recognized. Her steps grew lighter, the heavy panting of her first days gave way to steady breaths. Her hands, once soft and delicate, bore calluses and small scars, marks she now wore like badges of honor. She woke before dawn without complaint, helping Elias feed the animals, drawing water, and tending the rows of vegetables. At first, the villagers still laughed when they saw her bent over in the fields, mud clinging to her skirts. But soon, the laughter quieted. They began to watch instead, watch as she carried baskets with her own strength, as she worked beside Elias without shame. In the evenings, she and Elias sometimes stood together on the hilltop, overlooking the glowing expanse of wheat and orchards. At first, the silence between them was heavy, but over time it became something different, comforting, in spoken companionship. One such evening, as the sky burned with streaks of orange and gold, Alina whispered, her voice trembling with truth. "I thought I was being given away to nothing. But I was given, to everything." Elias didn't reply, he only stood a little closer, his quiet presence stronger than any words. And in that moment, Alina understood. Her punishment had been no punishment at all, it was her beginning.